Men test women in silence more than they ever admit. Not with speeches, not with arguments, not with dramatic exits, but with quiet, with pauses, delayed responses, with moments where nothing is said at all. And here's the truth most people don't know until it's too late. How you act in that silence tells him everything he needs to know about your confidence, your standards, and your value. Silence is often used as a test, not a rejection, and most people misunderstand that from the very beginning. When a man becomes quiet, the first assumption is usually fear. Fear that something is wrong, fear that interest is fading, fear that you're about to be replaced or forgotten. Silence doesn't automatically mean loss. Many times silence is observation. It's a pause where someone steps back to see how you move when they stop guiding the rhythm. It's not about disappearing forever. It's about seeing whether you remain steady when reassurance is removed. In these moments, a man isn't listening to your words because there are none. He's watching your behavior. He's noticing whether you rush to fill the gap, whether you suddenly change your energy, whether you start over-explaining things that were never questioned. Silence becomes a test of emotional stability. It reveals whether your confidence comes from within or whether it depends on constant feedback. Most people think love requires immediate clarification. They believe every quiet moment must be solved, explained, or fixed. But strength shows up differently. Strength shows up in patience. Strength shows up in restraint. When you don't react impulsively to silence, you communicate that your peace isn't fragile. You show that your world doesn't collapse just because someone paused. Silence is powerful because it removes distraction. There's no charm, no flirting, no words doing the work for you. All that's left is who you are without validation, and that's why it feels uncomfortable. Silence forces truth to surface. If someone relies heavily on attention to feel secure, silence will expose that. If someone trusts themselves, silence won't shake them. A man testing through silence is trying to answer one question: does this person panic when control is removed? If the answer is yes, he learns that reassurance will always be required. If the answer is no, he learns that he's dealing with someone grounded, someone who won't emotionally unravel at the first sign of uncertainty. This doesn't mean ignoring or acting distant on purpose. It means allowing space to exist without assigning it negative meaning. It means understanding that connection doesn't disappear just because conversation pauses. Real confidence doesn't chase silence away. It sits comfortably inside it. Many fail this test because they assume silence is punishment. They treat it like an emergency instead of a moment. They respond from fear instead of self-respect. And without knowing it, they teach others how to treat them. They teach that pulling back gets a reaction. They teach that calm only exists when attention is constant. But when you understand that silence is not rejection, you stop reacting emotionally. You stop handing over power. You stay consistent. You stay composed. And that composure speaks louder than anything you could say. Men watch reactions more than words during quiet moments because silence removes performance and exposes truth. Anyone can say the right thing when conversation is flowing, when attention is constant, when reassurance is easy. But when things go quiet, when messages slow down, when there's space instead of noise, behavior becomes the language. That's when reactions matter more than intentions, and emotional habits reveal themselves without effort. In silence, a man is not focused on what you will say next. He's focused on what you will do when there is nothing to respond to. He notices whether you become restless, whether your tone changes, whether you suddenly seek validation or clarity. He observes how quickly your energy shifts when attention is no longer immediate. These moments show him whether your confidence is stable or conditional. Words can be rehearsed. Reactions cannot. When someone reacts emotionally to silence, it signals dependence on external reassurance. It suggests that calm only exists when communication is constant. Silence becomes uncomfortable because it removes the sense of control. And many people try to regain control by over-communicating, asking questions that don't need answers, or explaining emotions that were never challenged. Quiet moments reveal emotional discipline. When you don't rush to interpret silence as something negative, you show maturity. You show that you don't assume the worst just because things slow down. You show that you trust both yourself and the connection enough to let space exist. That level of self-trust is rare, and it's noticed immediately. Men pay attention to how someone handles uncertainty because relationships are full of it. There will always be pauses, delays, and moments of distance caused by life, stress, or reflection. If silence always triggers anxiety, it becomes exhausting. But when silence is met with steadiness, it creates ease. Ease builds respect. Many people fail in quiet moments because they believe their value must be constantly confirmed. So when words disappear, they feel invisible. They forget that presence isn't proven by constant communication. They forget that interest doesn't vanish simply because someone needed space. And in trying to secure reassurance, they reveal insecurity instead. When reactions remain calm, consistent, and self-assured, a message is sent without words. The message says, I am comfortable with myself. I don't need to chase clarity. I don't lose balance when things slow down. That message is far stronger than any emotional explanation. Silence becomes a measuring tool. It measures patience. It measures emotional regulation. It measures how someone handles the unknown. And those reactions, not words, are what stay remembered long after the quiet ends. Over-explaining weakens perceived confidence, and most people don't realize they're doing it until the damage is already done. The moment silence appears, the instinct to explain kicks in. You start clarifying things no one questioned. You start justifying feelings that didn't need defending. You start giving background stories, emotions, intentions, and reasons, hoping that more words will create security. But confidence has never been loud. Confidence is calm. And the more you explain yourself in silence, the more you reveal uncertainty instead of strength. Over-explaining usually comes from fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being forgotten, fear of losing someone without a chance to fix it. So you talk more, text more, explain more, believing that if they just understand you better, things will stay safe. But here's the truth. People who are secure don't rush to be understood. They trust that clarity will come when it's needed. When a man goes quiet and you immediately start explaining what he sees isn't care, it's imbalance. He sees someone trying to control the outcome instead of trusting themselves. Over-explaining sends a message that your emotional state depends on his response. It quietly tells him that silence unsettles you and that reassurance is required to keep you grounded. Strong presence doesn't explain itself. It allows space. It allows interpretation. It allows time. When you're confident, you don't feel the urge to convince anyone of your intentions or your value. You assume they can see it through consistency, speeches. Silence is not an accusation. It's not a courtroom where you need to defend yourself. But over-explaining treats it that way. It turns quiet into pressure. It turns connection into obligation. And it shifts the dynamic from mutual interest to emotional labor. Men notice when someone keeps talking to avoid discomfort. They notice when someone fills every gap with emotion because they can't sit with uncertainty. And while vulnerability is powerful, unrequested explanations feel like insecurity, not openness. There's strength in letting your actions speak. There's strength in allowing silence to exist without narrating it. When you don't explain yourself, you show trust in who you are. You show that you don't fear being misjudged because you know your consistency will speak louder than words ever could. Over-explaining also removes mystery. It gives everything at once, leaving no room for curiosity, reflection, or pursuit. Confidence knows when to speak and when to stay still. It understands that not every thought needs to be shared, and not every feeling needs to be processed out loud. When you resist the urge to over-explain, you regain balance. You stop performing for reassurance. You stop negotiating your worth. You let silence do its job. And in that space, respect grows, not because you said more, because you trusted yourself enough to say less. Emotional self-control changes the power dynamic in ways most people never notice. When silence appears, the situation itself doesn't hold the power, your reaction to it does. The moment emotions take over, control shifts away from you. Anxiety, frustration, and fear start driving behavior, and instead of choosing how you show up, you react. That reaction silently gives the other person influence over your emotional state. Self-control doesn't mean suppressing feelings or pretending not to care. It means not allowing temporary uncertainty to dictate your behavior. When a man goes quiet and you remain composed, you show that your emotions are stable. You show that you are not easily shaken by changes in attention. That stability naturally shifts the balance because the person who stays calm holds the ground. Many people confuse emotional intensity with passion. They believe that strong reactions prove deep feelings. But real strength shows up in regulation, not emotional overflow. Anyone can react when they feel uncomfortable. Few can remain centered and intentional. And that difference is felt immediately. Even if nothing is said out loud, when you don't rush to fix silence, you remove its ability to control you. You're no longer waiting for a message to feel okay. You're no longer scanning for signs or reading into pauses. Your focus stays on your life, your rhythm, your peace. That independence changes how you're perceived. It signals that your world doesn't pause just because someone else did. Men respect emotional control because it creates safety. It shows that conflict, stress, or distance won't result in chaos. It shows that you can handle uncertainty without escalating it. And in relationships, that quality is invaluable. It suggests long-term stability, not emotional volatility. Without self-control, silence turns into a trigger. It pulls reactions out of you that you later wish you'd held back. Messages get sent that don't align with your values. Emotions get expressed before they're understood. And once that happens, the power dynamic shifts. Instead of mutual connection, one person becomes the emotional center and the other becomes reactive. When you maintain self-control, you don't hand that power away. You stay in choice. You decide when to speak, what to say, and how much access someone has to your emotional world. That choice is felt. It creates respect even in quiet moments. Emotional self-control also protects your self-respect. It ensures that you don't abandon yourself just to maintain connection. You don't chase comfort at the cost of dignity. You stay aligned with who you are, regardless of someone else's behavior. Silence stops being threatening when you realize it can't move you unless you let it. And the moment you understand that, the entire dynamic shifts in your favor. Consistency in silence builds respect because it shows who you are when there is nothing to perform for. Anyone can be impressive when things are easy, when attention is flowing, when communication is constant, but silence removes the spotlight. It strips away excitement and leaves only patterns. And patterns are what people trust. When a man goes quiet and your behavior stays consistent, you communicate stability without saying a word. Most people change in silence. Their tone shifts, their energy drops or spikes. One day they are calm, the next day emotional. One moment confident, the next moment unsure. That inconsistency creates confusion. It makes the connection feel unstable. Silence exposes whether your confidence is real or conditional. Consistency shows that your character doesn't depend on someone else's mood or availability. When you remain the same person in quiet moments, you show emotional maturity. You don't punish silence. You don't chase it either. You don't withdraw dramatically or overextend emotionally. You stay grounded. That balance creates respect because it shows self-leadership. It shows that you don't lose direction just because the environment changes. Men pay attention to this more than they admit. They notice when someone becomes distant to gain control. They notice when someone becomes overly available to regain reassurance. But when your behavior stays steady, it creates a sense of reliability. Reliability builds trust, and trust builds respect. Consistency also removes emotional manipulation from the equation. Silence can sometimes be used to provoke a reaction. When there is no reaction to feed on, the silence loses its power. Calm consistency sends a message that you cannot be controlled by withdrawal. That message is strong. It tells the other person that connection with you is a choice, not a game. Respect grows when someone knows what to expect from you emotionally. Not predictability in a boring sense, but predictability in values. Knowing that you won't panic, knowing that you won't explode, knowing that you won't disappear just to make a point. That emotional steadiness creates safety, and safety deepens connection. Inconsistency, on the other hand, creates doubt. If silence turns you into someone else, it signals unresolved insecurity. It suggests that your sense of self shifts based on attention. Over time, that weakens how you are perceived, not because you care, but because you lose yourself in reaction. Consistency doesn't mean ignoring issues or avoiding communication. It means handling silence the same way you handle presence, with self-respect, calm, with intention. It means your worth doesn't rise and fall based on someone else's engagement. When you stay consistent in silence, you quietly teach others how to treat you. You teach that respect is required, even when words are absent. You teach that access to your emotions is not automatic. And most importantly, you reinforce your own standards without needing to announce them. Silence reveals many things, but consistency in silence reveals strength. Self-worth is revealed when no reassurance is given, because that is the moment when nothing external is holding you up. When attention is present, when messages are coming in, when words of affirmation are available, it's easy to feel confident. But when silence appears, all of that disappears. What remains is your relationship with yourself. Silence exposes whether you truly believe in your value or whether your confidence depends on being chosen in that moment. Many people don't realize how much reassurance they rely on until it's gone. Silence feels heavy because it removes confirmation, it removes proof. And without proof, insecurity starts speaking. Questions arise, doubt creeps in. The mind starts creating stories that may not even be true. This is where self-worth either stands firm or starts shaking. When you know your worth, silence doesn't feel like abandonment. It feels neutral. It feels like space. You don't assume the worst because your value isn't tied to someone else's behavior. You don't feel the urge to prove yourself, press, or explain. You stay rooted in who you are, not in how someone else is responding. Self-worth changes how you interpret silence. Instead of seeing it as rejection, you see it as information. You observe without reacting. You allow time to reveal intentions. You don't rush to fill gaps because you're not afraid of what might happen if you don't. That confidence is quiet, but it's powerful. Without self-worth, silence becomes threatening. It feels personal, it feels like a verdict, and in that state, people start chasing reassurance. They give more than they should. They lower standards just to feel secure again. They trade dignity for temporary comfort. And they don't even realize that in doing so, they are showing exactly how little they trust themselves. Men notice this difference immediately. They feel when someone's confidence collapses without validation. They feel when someone remains steady without applause. And that steadiness creates attraction because it signals independence. It says, I choose you, but I don't need you to choose me for me to be okay. Self-worth also determines boundaries in silence. When you value yourself, you don't overextend emotionally to keep someone's attention. You don't tolerate disrespect just because things are quiet. You allow silence to show you who someone is rather than trying to control the outcome. That patience protects you. Silence is a test not because someone is trying to hurt you, but because silence removes distractions. It shows how much you respect yourself when no one is reminding you to. It shows whether you can stand alone emotionally or whether you collapse without feedback. When reassurance is absent and you still feel whole, you become unshakable. You don't fear being misunderstood. You don't fear being left. You understand that anything meant for you will communicate clearly, and anything that requires you to shrink or beg was never